Awakening is betrayal, not the casual betrayal of changing your mind or abandoning a hobby, but the profound, irrevocable betrayal of everything that has kept you comfortable, safe, and small. It is the deliberate abandonment of the beliefs that have limited your thinking, the relationships that have constrained your growth, and the identity that has prevented you from becoming everything you're capable of being. To understand what must be betrayed, you must first map the specific architecture of limitation that has been constructed in your psyche over years or decades of conditioning. This architecture consists of interlocking beliefs, habits, relationships, and identities that function as a comprehensive system designed to keep you safe, predictable, and fundamentally unchanged. The foundation of this architecture is what psychologists call core limiting beliefs, fundamental assumptions about reality, human nature, and your own capabilities that were installed early in your development and have shaped every subsequent choice and interpretation. These beliefs feel like absolute truths rather than learned assumptions because they were acquired before you developed critical thinking skills. Common limiting beliefs include assumptions that resources are scarce and must be competed for desperately, that other people cannot be trusted with your authentic self, that safety requires conformity to group expectations, that your worth depends on external validation, and that significant change is dangerous or impossible. These core beliefs create what we might call perceptual filters that cause you to interpret all new information in ways that confirm existing limitations while filtering out evidence that could challenge your restricted worldview. The person who believes resources are scarce sees competition everywhere while missing opportunities for collaboration and abundance. The individual who believes others cannot be trusted sees betrayal and manipulation in neutral interactions while failing to recognize genuine care and support. The one who believes safety requires conformity sees independence as dangerous isolation while missing the freedom and authenticity that come from self-reliance. Built upon these limiting beliefs is what behavioral scientists call identity architecture, the collection of roles, characteristics, and self-concepts that define who you think you are, and therefore what you think you can become. This identity architecture includes both positive and negative self-concepts that function together to maintain psychological stability while preventing growth. You may identify yourself as someone who is naturally shy, not good with money, unlucky in love, bad at business, too old to change, too young to be taken seriously, too educated for practical work, or too practical for creative expression. Each of these identity components creates boundaries around what you attempt, what you believe possible, and what you allow yourself to become. The identity architecture also includes positive self-concepts that can be equally limiting when they prevent you from developing beyond familiar strengths. The person who identifies as naturally helpful may avoid developing assertiveness skills. The individual who sees themselves as creative but not practical may refuse to learn business or financial management. The one who considers themselves logical but not emotional may neglect developing interpersonal and intuitive capabilities. Supporting this identity architecture is what we might call behavioral infrastructure, the habits, routines, and automatic responses that implement your limiting beliefs and maintain your restricted identity on a daily basis. This infrastructure includes everything from how you spend your time, to how you respond to challenges, to how you interact with different types of people. The behavioral infrastructure of limitation includes habits like avoiding situations that create anxiety rather than developing anxiety tolerance, seeking comfort and familiarity rather than embracing beneficial challenges, making decisions based on others' expectations rather than your own authentic assessment, and investing energy in maintaining existing arrangements rather than creating better possibilities. These behavioral patterns feel natural and automatic because they've been practiced for years, but they function as daily votes for remaining who you have been rather than becoming who you could be. Each habitual choice to avoid discomfort, seek approval, or maintain the status quo reinforces the psychological architecture that keeps you limited. The social dimension of your limitation architecture includes what researchers call reference group dependency, the need for validation, belonging, and identity confirmation from specific groups of people who know you in particular ways and benefit from your remaining predictable and unchanged. Your family may need you to remain the responsible one, the rebel, the peacemaker, or the entertainer. Your friends may need you to share their limitations, complaints, and lifestyle choices. Your romantic partners may need you to remain at their level of development to avoid threatening their own comfort zones. These social needs create powerful pressures against transformation because changing yourself often requires disappointing people who have psychological investments in your remaining as you are. The architecture of limitation includes not just your own resistance to change, but others' resistance to your development. Perhaps the most sophisticated component of limitation architecture is what we might call meta-limitation beliefs. Beliefs about change itself that prevent you from attempting transformation even when you recognize that change would be beneficial. These include beliefs that significant change is impossible, that attempting change leads to failure and disappointment, that changing yourself means betraying your authentic nature, or that personal development is selfish and harmful to others. Meta-limitation beliefs create what psychologists call learned helplessness, specifically around personal growth and development. Even when you can clearly see what needs to change in your life, these beliefs prevent you from taking action because they've convinced you that meaningful change is either impossible or inappropriate. The complete architecture of personal limitation functions as an integrated system where each component reinforces every other component. Your limiting beliefs shape your identity. Your identity determines your behavior. Your behavior influences your social relationships, and your social relationships confirm your limiting beliefs. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle that maintains stability while preventing growth. Breaking free from this architecture requires more than positive thinking or motivation. It requires the systematic identification and dismantling of each component while simultaneously building new structures that support growth rather than limitation. This process is necessarily uncomfortable because it involves destroying familiar psychological arrangements while creating new ones based on capabilities you haven't yet fully developed. The person who attempts to change while preserving their limitation architecture will find that their efforts are constantly undermined by the very psychological structures they're trying to maintain. True awakening requires recognizing that these structures must be betrayed completely if transformation is to occur. Perhaps no aspect of awakening requires more courage than betraying the relationships that have provided identity, security, and belonging, while simultaneously preventing your authentic development. These relationships feel like the most precious aspects of your life, yet they often function as the strongest chains that keep you bound to limited versions of yourself. The family relationships that bind are not obviously abusive or dysfunctional. They are the normal, loving connections that have assigned you roles, established expectations, and created obligations that prevent you from discovering who you could become beyond the family system. These relationships operate through what psychologists call systemic pressure to maintain familiar patterns that serve the family's stability rather than individual members' growth. Consider the family role you've been assigned. The responsible one who manages others' problems, the peacekeeper who avoids conflict at any cost, the rebel who provides drama and excitement, the achiever who represents the family's success, or the underachiever who makes others feel better about their own limitations. These roles provide identity and belonging, while preventing you from exploring aspects of yourself that don't fit the assigned character. The family member who has always been the responsible one cannot explore spontaneity, risk-taking, or creative expression without triggering family anxiety and pressure to return to their stabilizing role. The one who has been the peacekeeper cannot develop assertiveness, leadership, or healthy conflict engagement without creating family discomfort about their changing behavior. These family pressures operate through guilt, obligation, and the threat of relationship loss. When you begin to outgrow your assigned role, family members may express concern that you're changing in unhealthy ways, that success is making you arrogant, that independence is making you selfish, or that growth is making you abandon your values and responsibilities. But examine these concerns carefully, and you'll often discover that they're actually expressions of the family system's resistance to change rather than genuine care for your well-being. The family that benefits from your limitation will naturally resist your liberation, even when they consciously want what's best for you. Friendship relationships that bind operate through what sociologists call homophily, the tendency for people to associate with others who share similar characteristics, circumstances, and limitations. These friendships provide comfort and validation through shared experiences of struggle, complaint, and resignation to circumstances that could potentially be changed. The friendship bonds that limit your development are often based on mutual agreement to remain at similar levels of achievement, risk-taking, and personal responsibility. You maintain connections with people who share your limitations because their presence confirms that your restrictions are normal, necessary, or virtuous rather than chosen and changeable. When one person in such a friendship begins to develop beyond the group's established limitations, the others may respond with subtle sabotage, direct criticism, or withdrawal of support. They may claim that success has changed you, that ambition has made you arrogant, or that growth has made you abandon your real friends. These responses reveal that the friendship was based on shared limitation rather than genuine affection or support for each other's authentic development. The friend who cannot celebrate your growth while pursuing their own development was never truly your friend. They were your partner in mutual limitation. Romantic relationships that bind are perhaps the most complex because they combine emotional attachment, physical intimacy, and often practical interdependence with psychological patterns that can either support or prevent individual growth. Many romantic relationships are unconsciously designed to maintain both partners at their current level of development rather than supporting mutual evolution. The romantic partner who needs you to remain insecure to feel superior, who requires you to stay dependent to feel needed, or who demands that you avoid growth opportunities to maintain relationship harmony, is not loving you. They are loving the version of you that serves their psychological needs while preventing you from becoming who you could be. These limiting romantic patterns often disguise themselves as devotion, loyalty, or deep connection. The partner who becomes anxious when you develop new interests claims they miss spending time with you. The one who criticizes your ambitions claims they're protecting you from disappointment. The one who undermines your confidence claims they're keeping you humble and grounded. But authentic love supports authentic development, even when that development creates temporary challenges or requires relationship adjustments. The partner who truly loves you wants you to become everything you're capable of becoming, even if your growth creates some discomfort or requires them to grow as well. Professional relationships that bind include colleagues, mentors, and industry connections that benefit from your remaining at your current level of capability and influence, rather than developing beyond their ability to manage or compete with you. These relationships may appear supportive while actually functioning to keep you safely subordinate or dependably predictable. The colleague who always comes to you for help, but never offers reciprocal support, is using your competence to manage their inadequacy while preventing you from developing relationships with peers who could enhance your capabilities. The mentor who keeps you dependent on their guidance rather than developing your independent judgment is serving their need to feel important rather than your need to become self-reliant. The industry connections that bind are those that require you to maintain particular personas, opinions, or limitations to preserve your acceptability within established networks. These relationships may provide opportunities while preventing you from exploring possibilities that would challenge group norms or exceed others' comfort levels. Breaking free from binding relationships requires distinguishing between people who genuinely care about your well-being and people who benefit from your limitation. The person who truly cares about you will support your authentic development even when your growth creates challenges for them. The person who benefits from your limitation will resist your development while claiming to have your best interests at heart. This distinction can be painful to recognize because it reveals that some relationships you've treasured were actually based on mutual limitation rather than mutual love. The person who cannot adapt to your growth, who becomes hostile when you exceed their expectations, or who withdraws support when you no longer need them, was never truly committed to your welfare. The betrayal that awakening requires is not the cruel abandonment of people who care about you. It is the necessary separation from people who need you to remain limited for their own psychological comfort. This betrayal serves everyone's authentic interests because it frees both parties to find relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than mutual dependency and limitation. The most profound betrayal that awakening requires is the betrayal of your current identity. The collection of self-concepts, personal narratives, and characteristic patterns that define who you think you are and therefore determine what you believe you can become. This identity death is the most terrifying aspect of transformation because it feels like the annihilation of your essential self, when it's actually the liberation of your authentic potential. Your current identity was constructed through years of conditioning, social feedback, and defensive adaptations to circumstances that no longer exist. This identity includes both the positive self-concepts that you're proud of and the negative self-concepts that limit you, but both categories of identity can prevent growth when they become rigid definitions rather than flexible descriptions. Consider the positive aspects of your identity that might need to die for awakening to occur. Perhaps you identify as someone who is naturally humble, always helpful, inherently peaceful, or consistently reliable. These characteristics may have served you well in previous circumstances, but they can become limitations when they prevent you from developing complementary capacities. The person who identifies as naturally humble may avoid developing the confidence and self-promotion skills necessary for leadership or entrepreneurial success. The individual who sees themselves as always helpful may sacrifice their own development to maintain their identity as someone others can depend on. The one who considers themselves inherently peaceful may avoid necessary confrontations that could improve their circumstances. These positive identity components feel precious because they've provided social approval and personal meaning, but they can function as golden cages that prevent the development of a more complete and flexible self. The awakening person must be willing to risk losing others' appreciation for their familiar positive qualities in order to develop capabilities that might make them more powerful but less predictable. The negative aspects of identity that must die are often even more difficult to release, because they've become so familiar that they feel like fundamental truths about your nature rather than learned limitations that can be transcended. These negative identities include beliefs that you are naturally shy, bad with money, unlucky in relationships, too old to change, or lacking in specific capabilities. But examine how these negative identities function in your life, and you'll often discover that they provide psychological benefits that make you reluctant to abandon them. The identity of being bad with money excuses you from taking financial responsibility. The belief that you're naturally shy protects you from the risks of social engagement. The assumption that you're unlucky in love prevents you from confronting behavioral patterns that might be sabotaging your relationships. These negative identities feel limiting, but they also feel safe because they create predictable boundaries around what you attempt and what others expect from you. They provide stability and certainty in exchange for growth and possibility. Abandoning them requires accepting uncertainty about what you might be capable of achieving if you stopped defining yourself by your limitations. Perhaps the most difficult identity component to betray is what we might call your victim narrative, the story you tell about how circumstances, other people, or systemic forces have prevented you from achieving what you want. This narrative may be factually accurate about past experiences while functioning as a psychological prison that prevents future development. The victim narrative provides meaning, identity, and social connection through shared experiences of struggle and injustice. It explains your limitations in ways that absolve you of responsibility while generating sympathy and support from others who share similar experiences. It makes you special through your suffering while keeping you stuck in patterns that perpetuate that suffering. Betraying your victim narrative doesn't mean denying that you've experienced genuine challenges, discrimination, or unfair treatment. It means refusing to allow past experiences to define your future possibilities, choosing personal agency over historical grievance, and accepting responsibility for your current choices, regardless of how your limitations originated. This betrayal feels like abandoning others who share your struggles, minimizing the reality of systemic problems, or becoming callous toward genuine injustices. But actually, it means becoming powerful enough to address these problems effectively, rather than remaining weakened by identification with victimhood. The professional identity that must die includes your attachment to job titles, industry roles, and career paths that no longer serve your developing interests and capabilities. This professional identity may have provided security, status, and social connection, but it can prevent you from pursuing opportunities that would better utilize your expanding potential. The doctor who dreams of becoming an artist cannot achieve artistic greatness while maintaining their identity as someone who must practice medicine. The corporate executive who wants to start a social enterprise cannot create authentic change while preserving their identity as someone who prioritizes shareholder value above all other considerations. These professional identity deaths feel like betraying investments of time, money, and effort that went into building expertise and reputation in particular fields. They may also feel like disappointing family members who take pride in your professional status, or abandoning financial security that comes from established career paths. But the person who clings to professional identities that no longer fit their authentic interests and developing capabilities will experience increasing disconnection between who they are and what they do, leading to depression, resentment, and the gradual erosion of their life force. The cultural and social identities that must die include attachments to group memberships that provide belonging and meaning, but prevent individual development beyond group norms. These identities might be based on ethnicity, religion, political affiliation, social class, or lifestyle choices that once provided essential community and purpose. The individual who outgrows their cultural group's limitations faces the choice between maintaining group belonging and pursuing individual potential. This choice feels like betraying their heritage, abandoning their people, or losing essential aspects of who they are. But authentic cultural identity can evolve beyond limiting group norms while maintaining connection to valuable traditions and relationships. The person who betrays limiting cultural expectations doesn't necessarily betray their cultural essence. They may actually embody that essence more fully by developing capabilities that serve both individual and cultural advancement. The death of identity that awakening requires is not the destruction of your essential self. It's the revelation of your essential self through the removal of learned limitations that have been mistaken for fundamental characteristics. Beneath your conditioned identity lies your authentic nature, which is far more capable, flexible, and powerful than the limited self-concept you've been maintaining. The courage required for authentic awakening goes beyond the ordinary bravery needed for specific challenges or risks. It demands the extraordinary willingness to abandon everything familiar in exchange for possibilities that cannot be guaranteed. This abandonment is not reckless destruction, but strategic liberation from everything that has kept you smaller than your potential allows. Developing this courage begins with recognizing that everything you're afraid to lose has already been limiting you in ways you may not have acknowledged. The beliefs you're reluctant to question have been restricting your thinking. The relationships you're hesitant to outgrow have been constraining your development. The identity you're terrified to abandon has been preventing you from discovering your authentic capabilities. This recognition doesn't make the abandonment easier, but it makes it necessary. The comfort you feel in maintaining limiting beliefs, relationships, and identities is actually the comfort of remaining trapped in familiar patterns that prevent growth. The security you experience through clinging to known limitations is actually insecurity about your ability to handle unknown possibilities. The courage to abandon everything requires developing what we might call existential confidence. The deep knowing that you can create meaning, relationships, and success from nothing if necessary, because these things emerge from your capabilities rather than from your circumstances. This confidence comes not from believing everything will work out perfectly, but from knowing that you can handle whatever challenges arise, from choosing growth over comfort. This existential confidence develops through gradually expanding your comfort zone, taking calculated risks, and discovering that you're more resilient and capable than your limited self-concept suggested. Each experience of successfully navigating uncertainty builds evidence that you can survive and thrive even when familiar supports are removed. The practical implementation of abandonment requires what military strategists call tactical retreat, the disciplined withdrawal from positions that no longer serve your strategic objectives. This is not running away from responsibility, but consciously choosing to invest your limited time and energy in activities, relationships, and environments that support rather than hinder your development. Tactical retreat from limiting beliefs means systematically questioning assumptions that restrict your thinking and experimenting with alternative perspectives that expand your possibilities. Instead of defending beliefs because they're familiar, you evaluate them based on whether they help you think more clearly and act more effectively. Tactical retreat from limiting relationships means gradually reducing investment in connections that drain your energy while increasing investment in relationships that energize and challenge you. This doesn't necessarily mean dramatic confrontations or cruel rejections. It often means simply becoming less available for dysfunction while becoming more available for growth-oriented interactions. Tactical retreat from limiting environments means relocating to places that provide better opportunities, challenges, and social connections that support your developing capabilities. The environment that served your previous level of development may no longer provide the stimulation, resources, or relationships necessary for continued growth. The emotional dimension of abandonment requires developing what psychologists call loss tolerance, the ability to experience grief, guilt, and uncertainty without allowing these emotions to prevent necessary changes. The abandonment that awakening requires naturally generates feelings of sadness, fear, and regret, because you're leaving familiar territory for unknown possibilities. These emotions are not evidence that abandonment is wrong. They're natural responses to significant change that should be acknowledged, felt, and processed rather than avoided or suppressed. The person who cannot tolerate these uncomfortable feelings will remain trapped by their emotional responses to necessary changes. Loss tolerance develops through practicing small abandonments and learning that you can survive the discomfort that comes with leaving familiar limitations. Each experience of successfully navigating emotional challenges builds confidence in your ability to handle larger transformations. The social dimension of abandonment requires accepting that others may not understand or support your choices to outgrow familiar patterns. Family members may interpret your growth as rejection of them. Friends may see your development as abandonment of shared values. Colleagues may view your advancement as betrayal of group solidarity. These responses are natural because your growth challenges others' comfort zones and may trigger their own anxiety about change. The courage to abandon everything includes the willingness to be misunderstood while pursuing authentic development rather than maintaining others' comfort. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others' feelings, but it does mean prioritizing your authentic development over others' preference for you to remain unchanged. The person who cannot disappoint others when necessary will remain forever limited by others' comfort levels rather than developing their genuine potential. The spiritual dimension of abandonment requires releasing attachment to specific outcomes while maintaining commitment to authentic development. You cannot abandon everything while simultaneously controlling exactly what emerges from that abandonment. The courage to abandon requires faith in the process of growth, rather than certainty about particular destinations. This spiritual abandonment includes releasing attachment to how others respond to your changes, how quickly transformation occurs, and what specific forms your new life will take. You commit to the process of becoming while releasing control over the exact results of that becoming. Perhaps most importantly, the courage to abandon everything requires recognizing that this abandonment is not punishment or sacrifice, but liberation from limitations that have been preventing you from experiencing your full aliveness. What you're abandoning has been keeping you dead, while what you're embracing offers the possibility of authentic vitality. The person who develops this courage discovers that abandoning everything that made them weak doesn't leave them with nothing. It leaves them with everything they need to become strong. Beneath the layers of limiting beliefs, relationships, and identities lies their authentic nature, which is far more powerful and capable than anything they're afraid to lose through awakening. The courage to abandon everything is ultimately the courage to bet on your own potential rather than your current limitations, to trust your capacity for growth rather than your need for security, to choose unknown strength over familiar weakness. You now stand at the threshold of the ultimate betrayal, not the betrayal of others, but the betrayal of every aspect of yourself that has accepted limitation as permanent, weakness as natural, and mediocrity as inevitable. This betrayal is not an act of self-destruction, but of self-liberation, not abandonment of who you are, but discovery of who you've always been, beneath the layers of conditioning that have kept you small. The betrayal that awakening requires is not cruelty but compassion. Compassion for your authentic self that has been buried beneath years of conditioning, compromise, and conformity. It is the deepest act of self-love to betray everything that has prevented you from becoming who you truly are. You cannot awaken until you betray what made you weak, because strength and weakness cannot coexist in the same psychological space. Every belief, relationship, and identity component that has limited you must be released to make room for capabilities, connections, and self-concepts that serve your highest development. This betrayal is not a single act, but a continuous process of choosing growth over comfort, potential over security, authentic development over social approval. Each day presents new opportunities to betray limiting patterns while embracing expanding possibilities. The person who finds the courage for this ultimate betrayal discovers that they lose nothing essential and gain everything they've been seeking. They don't become someone different. They become who they've always been when stripped of everything that was never truly them. You cannot awaken until you betray what made you weak, because awakening is the betrayal of weakness itself, not through force or violence, but through the simple choice to no longer identify with limitation, to no longer invest energy in patterns that restrict your development, to no longer choose the familiar prison of who you have been over the unknown freedom of who you could become. The betrayal is waiting. Your authentic self is waiting. Your greatest life is waiting. What will you abandon to claim it? The moment has arrived when you must choose between loyalty to your limitations and faithfulness to your potential, between preserving what has made you comfortable and embracing what could make you powerful, between betraying your authentic nature or betraying the conditioned patterns that have prevented its expression. This choice cannot be delayed, negotiated, or partially implemented. You cannot awaken while maintaining loyalty to the beliefs that have limited your thinking, the relationships that have constrained your growth, or the identity that has prevented you from becoming everything you're capable of being. If you choose to maintain loyalty to what made you weak, understand what you're preserving. You're choosing to keep beliefs that have restricted your possibilities, relationships that have drained your energy, and an identity that has prevented you from discovering your authentic capabilities. You're agreeing to remain trapped in familiar patterns that feel safe while preventing growth, to maintain connections that provide comfort while limiting potential, to preserve a self-concept that offers predictability while blocking transformation. But if you choose the path of ultimate betrayal, if you commit to abandoning everything that has kept you limited in service of becoming everything you could be, you're accepting something far more challenging and infinitely more rewarding. You're choosing to trust your potential more than your current limitations, to bet on your authentic nature rather than your conditioned patterns, to embrace uncertainty about who you might become rather than certainty about who you have been. You're accepting that awakening requires death, the death of familiar beliefs, comfortable relationships, and known identities in service of rebirth into possibilities that you cannot imagine from your current perspective, but that represent your authentic potential. The most destructive force in human development is not external oppression or unavoidable circumstance. It is the internal loyalty to patterns that once served you, but now limit you. This loyalty feels noble and virtuous because it masquerades as consistency, faithfulness, and integrity. But it actually functions as a sophisticated form of self-sabotage that prevents growth while making you feel good about remaining stuck. Consider how this destructive loyalty operates in your belief systems. You cling to religious, political, or philosophical frameworks that provided meaning and identity in previous stages of your development, even when these frameworks no longer serve your current understanding or circumstances. You remain loyal to ideas that once helped you make sense of the world, but now prevent you from seeing new possibilities and responding to changing realities. This intellectual loyalty keeps you trapped in outdated ways of thinking while convincing you that changing your mind would be a betrayal of your principles rather than an evolution of your understanding. You defend beliefs that limit your options while feeling virtuous about your consistency, never recognizing that your loyalty to these limiting beliefs is preventing you from discovering what you could believe if you allowed your thinking to develop beyond its current boundaries. The same destructive loyalty appears in your relationship patterns. You maintain connections with family members, friends, and romantic partners who consistently drain your energy, limit your growth, or actively undermine your development, because abandoning these relationships feels like betrayal of love, loyalty, or commitment. But examine these relationships carefully, and you'll often discover that what you call love is actually dependency. What you call loyalty is actually fear of change, and what you call commitment is actually the inability to imagine yourself existing independently of familiar but limiting social arrangements. The person who has never learned to be alone maintains relationships that provide company while preventing growth. The individual who has never developed internal validation seeks relationships that provide external approval while restricting authentic self-expression. The one who has never learned to create their own meaning maintains connections that provide identity while limiting potential. Your loyalty to these limiting relationships isn't actually serving the other people involved. It's enabling their weaknesses while preventing both of you from discovering what you could become if you were free to develop without the constraints that maintain familiar but dysfunctional patterns. Career loyalty often creates the same destructive dynamic. You remain in jobs, industries, or professional identities that once provided security or status, but now prevent you from pursuing opportunities that would better utilize your developing capabilities and interests. You stay loyal to career paths that served your previous level of development while rejecting possibilities that would serve your current potential. This professional loyalty traps you in roles that have become too small for your expanded capacities, while making you feel responsible and stable rather than recognizing that your loyalty to an inadequate career is preventing you from making contributions that would serve both your interests and others' needs more effectively. Geographic loyalty creates similar limitations when you remain in locations that served your previous circumstances, but no longer provide the opportunities, connections, or environments that would support your current development. You stay loyal to places that feel like home, while avoiding locations that could provide the challenges and possibilities necessary for continued growth. The most insidious aspect of destructive loyalty is how it disguises limitation as virtue. You feel good about maintaining loyalty to beliefs, relationships, careers, and locations that constrain your development, because loyalty itself is considered admirable, regardless of whether the objects of that loyalty actually serve your authentic interests. This creates a psychological trap, where changing anything feels like moral failure rather than developmental necessity. You experience guilt about outgrowing beliefs that no longer fit your understanding, sadness about ending relationships that no longer serve your growth, and anxiety about leaving familiar circumstances that no longer provide adequate challenges or opportunities. But this guilt, sadness, and anxiety are actually appropriate responses to the death of who you have been. They signal that real transformation is occurring, that you are abandoning familiar limitations in favor of unknown possibilities, that you are choosing growth over comfort and potential over security. The person who never experiences these feelings never actually transforms. They simply rearrange the surface elements of their life while maintaining the same basic patterns, relationships, and limitations that have always constrained their development. They mistake motion for progress, change for growth, and adjustment for awakening. True awakening requires recognizing that your loyalty to what made you weak is the primary force keeping you weak. Every belief you refuse to question, every relationship you maintain despite its limiting effects, every circumstance you preserve despite its inadequacy, represents a choice to remain who you have been, rather than becoming who you could be. The betrayal that awakening requires is not cruelty toward others or abandonment of responsibility. It is the conscious choice to prioritize your authentic development over the comfort that comes from maintaining familiar but limiting patterns. It is choosing unknown strength over known weakness, uncertain possibility over certain limitation, potential fulfillment over guaranteed mediocrity. Tonight, we confront the most uncomfortable truth about personal transformation. You cannot evolve while remaining loyal to the patterns, people, and principles that created your current limitations. The very foundations that have provided your psychological security, your social belonging, and your sense of self must be systematically abandoned if you want to transcend the life they have made possible. This betrayal feels like death, because in many ways it is death, the death of who you have been in service of who you could become. Every belief you release, every relationship you outgrow, every comfort zone you abandon represents the killing of familiar aspects of yourself to make room for capacities and possibilities that cannot coexist with your current way of being. Over the next hour, we will explore why awakening requires betrayal, what specifically must be betrayed, and how to navigate the guilt, loss, and uncertainty that accompany the systematic abandonment of everything that has made you who you are. You will discover that loyalty to your limitations is the primary obstacle to your liberation, and that the courage to betray what made you weak is the only path to becoming genuinely strong. By the end of this exploration, you will understand that the choice facing you is not between betrayal and loyalty, but between betraying your limitations or betraying your potential, between abandoning what made you weak or abandoning what could make you powerful.